water, and then she was doing like the straw, the is it
Tube
beyond?
exercise,
Yeah,
yeah,
she
yeah.
did. She did some of that, and then did some like of the really high range stuff, like in your falsetto and all that. And then she just did like 10 minutes. I was like, okay, I'll just. She was gonna just rest before the show, and then she was fine. But I was like, how do you go on if you're sick? Like, oh, she was coming off the back of sickness, but like, if you're mid song and get like a bit phlegmy, there's nothing we can
No,
do.
you can't. They just have to get through it. But the
Exactly.
singing, intermittent vocal voice use, I mean, that's the key, isn't it?
Yeah.
Of just intermittently doing 3 or 4 minutes every half an hour when you wake up, very gentle work, and really conserving the voice. But you kind of doing that also just to check, does it start to feel free moving, and just intermittent little gentle humming. People always think they've got to be singing full out and singing songs to warm up, and actually really gentle. The warm-up's just about getting everything moving, and obviously if you've got to really go, you've got to check that you can get there.
Get there. Yeah.
Sirening is an interesting one, because a nice soft siren on an NG is actually quite an advanced maneuver. It's not very high airflow. If you're a bit stiff, a bit swollen, it ain't going to happen when you get up, because it needs a very complete contact vocal folds right through range. You need a nice stretch. It's supposed to be low effort. So when they come in and they're doing a big loud pushy siren, I'm like, okay, no, that's not the siren. That's not. So me, I like a little, or I really like a,
Yes.
my favorite, or a little lip trumpet, much better than much more difficult. So I'm like, stop practicing that. But it's it's a way, I suppose, that if because you can squeeze into that very easily and think you've got a problem, and it's just because you've restricted into it. So giving yourself a bit of help, and also you've got tutors there to go and chat with, and I think if they then say, oh, I'm not sure about this, then you go and get help. Then go. I think the issue is there's lots of amazing advice out there on YouTube, but there's lots of advice from people who aren't very, shouldn't really be giving necessarily. They're trying to be helpful, but it's not always that helpful. Nobody can diagnose you by just listening to your voice. And I think that's really important, that if we feel that there's an issue and we've tried some of these more conservative, just working with the voice to see how it moves when you get it warmed up gently. That's the key. It's not necessarily always technical. It can be to do with the fact, okay, well, I can hear that. And I think when tutors hear that the speaking voice is also affected, so that's a bit easier. When it's just singing voices that seem to be a bit glitchy, or there's a problem, or there's some issues, it kind of takes often a little bit longer for people to work that.
Right.
That makes sense?
Yeah, I get you. God, yeah, it's so interesting. That, like,
we do see lots of other things other than nodules. Obviously, we do see people with a little polyp, which can be caused by a hemorrhage, a little bleed, where you get just one little bump on the surface afterwards. Or sometimes I've had a couple of performers, had someone at the moment just actually was really poorly and was vomiting a lot, and actually had a vocal fold hemorrhage. So was waiting to think, okay, just picked up a horrible noro bug, and bless him, voice did not improve, and second week back sort of still hadn't improved, and then finally someone had to look and he'd had a hemorrhage, but it was just from all the being sick. And sometimes that is what happens. Things just like a little hemorrhage can happen. Sometimes that will form into a polyp that will either go with therapy and rest, or sometimes it will be, by the time we see them, they've still been working with it and they actually need to have it removed.
That's the little thing that kind of comes off the fold.
It's like a little, like a little fluid-filled sac, I suppose, or it's looks like a little cyst, but it's not. And they can be all different sizes, so they can be tiny, they can be massive, but they generally caused by an area of trauma that's happened. I've certainly had someone where it's happened where they just did a big sneeze, unfortunately, and had a hemorrhage and didn't know. Usually the polyp starts when you've been using your voice and you didn't know. We see many more people with a vocal fold cyst the nodules.
Yeah.
More that's probably been there from birth and has just grown, or it just develops. But we see sometimes people with 2 cysts. But sometimes what happens is people go and they might be seen in a more general ENT clinic with the camera that's not quite so clear, or they haven't got such a experienced eye for vocal issues. And there's one bump, and then the other side is sort of a little swelling as well, and they'll say it's nodules, but actually it's a cyst that's hitting the other side and creating a bit of a reaction. And so really getting a correct diagnosis. You can't get a unilateral nodule. You never get a nodule on one vocal fold. It's always a polyp or a cyst, or sometimes other little growths like papilloma, or there's other little things that can, obviously. But those are the main. The main things that we see with singers are what we call a muscle tension imbalance.
Okay.
They're overdoing, and they're over squeezing and overworking. Sometimes that's come because they've been ill and they've had to work, and then the muscles still get set in that tighter zone. Yeah. Sometimes it's technical because they're just used to pushing from here, and the airflow isn't sort of there because they haven't necessarily had the technical training. Sometimes it's very much emotionally based. We see a lot of people very highly stressed, have anxiety, maybe even other things like autism now, ADHD, other things. There's labels that come out where people have been managing these symptoms for a long time and do a lot of holding in the body, and this impacts their voice. Oh, there's so much stuff. It's fascinating. We occasionally see neurological issues where the nerve is affected on one side and there's a bit of weakness. Sometimes people randomly, very rarely, but randomly can develop that when they've got a virus, a cough or cold. I definitely saw a couple of patients in the second wave of COVID who had a vocal cord paralysis because of that. Yeah. But generally we have sort of refluxy things, allergy, nodules occasionally, vocal fold irritation, this muscle tension imbalance. Cyst is probably in the odd polyp. They tend to be the most common that we see with sort of structural stuff for performers and young performers.
Yeah. It just goes to show though that even like you're not just seeing training like shoots, you're seeing professionals who have these issues and obviously still don't know. Like, had they known about some of that before, they might have gone to see somebody earlier, or like they could have clocked it, maybe something themselves, because obviously I was about 2 months, like no idea. And like some people said, oh, maybe you should get seen, but when I was like, I had no idea really. And it was my auntie who came to see me, and she was like, no. And she literally was Googling. She was all over the internet looking for someone, and then obviously found Declan and everything. And then like within 2 weeks, I was in London. Yeah. But that's
the thing. I'm linked in with a charity called BAPAM, the British Association for Performing Arts Medicine. I'm hoping you're going to be writing a bit about that in your thing. And they're also linked in with this amazing charity, Help Musicians UK. Yeah. And there's also things like the Royal Society of Musicians, and there's a couple of other charities that we can also link in with. HMUK also has things like Music Mind Matters as well, that also BAPAM linked with for mental health support. So these are basically UK charities, funded charities, and they offer lots of support about finding these sorts of links. Yeah. And I sit on the Vocal Health Committee, and that part of the committee was sort of formed to be able to provide more consolidated information, and also to locate and develop skills throughout the UK, so that if people are studying wherever they are in the UK, that they can access a good specialist NHS sort of singer specialist voice clinic. So you've got the right equipment looking and the right people in the room. Yes. Usually the voice clinics have a speech and language therapist, an ENT consultant as a minimum, and a nurse. And then occasionally, if you're lucky, there's also a singing voice specialist, a vocal rehabilitation coach. And there are a few of those in the country that have someone in those clinics at the moment. Newcastle is one, Liverpool is one, Birmingham is one. There's Lewisham, Guys, where I work, and those are the main ones at the moment off the top of my head. And then some of them might even have an osteopath linked in and a physio. sort of developing, but that's in the NHS. But BAPAM run clinics, so if you're having trouble getting referral via a GP, they do a BAPAM sort of screen with the professionals where you can go and talk about what the issues are, and then the GP will write to the GP recommending that they refer to one of these specialists, so sing specialist voice clinic centres, because you don't want to go to general ENT where you're likely to not necessarily get the right diagnosis, and it slows things up. The HMUK funding, BAPAM funding, what's happened, they've been amazing at supporting people with grants, so that, because since COVID particularly, the waiting lists are quite long, and if someone needs something urgently, they may support for you to be seen. And we're also trying to put together a bit more of a comprehensive list in private practice of where people can go quickly for that. And this is for these specialist ENT laryngologists. They don't run a team clinic for that because it would be very expensive.
Yeah.
But at least you get seen, and there's a network then of being seen by myself or another voice specialist or singer specialist SLT in the UK. I mean, we did all our work online. It would have been brilliant to you in person, but it's all online because you're in another place in the UK, and I think that's so this sort of stuff's really opened up to it. But I think one of the biggest things that people struggle with is getting a GP to refer to a specialist clinic. So I really, out of everything, I really wanted people to know that this is there, and also to move forward into if you are going to be performing professionally, that there's a grant for students, and then there's a grant for people working.
Yeah.
You have to be in work, because if you're working, it has to be that if you're singing or musicianship of any sort, it has to be 50% of your income. So there's always this little blip when people finish education and they haven't maybe got jobs yet, but they might have issues, and then there's no funding in that gap.
Yeah.
But you know, that's me wittering on a bit, but you know, that at the end of the day, we generally say if you've got a new voice problem and it sort of lasts, if you've been ill, you wait until you feel better, and if the voice persists 2 weeks longer and isn't improving, you then go.
Yeah.
But if your voice goes off and you're not ill, you wait 2 or 3 weeks, and then we say, okay, get a referral. If you're in the middle of a performance in a show and you feel something immediately happen with your voice, my advice is don't use it. Get an immediate, as far as you can, get it assessed. If you feel something pop, you feel something, suddenly parts of your voice suddenly don't work, it may, not definitely, it may indicate that you've had a little hemorrhage. And the treatment for that is 5 days of total voice rest. You don't speak at all for 5 days or 5 to 7 days. It gets reabsorbed quite quickly, and then often things improve. Yeah, the problem is there's loads of people that happens to in the whole of the population. They never know. They go somewhere, they're at a concert, they're at sports, something happens. So it's not that common, by the way, but I'm just saying.
Yeah.
But this sort of thing is kind of judging, you know, I would expect people in a busy 2-week work prep schedule to get feel fatigue, to get vocal fatigue. But I think if you start to feel like big parts of your voice are knocked off, or you've got a little dead patch, or there's a bit of pitch instability, or there's a little two-tone sound, or there's something really odd going on, it's really important to share that and have a little bit of a rest, and then maybe go and see one of the tutors if you're on the course, or start to get an opinion. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely. I didn't know that. So is it BAPAM like come into schools and do kind of talks and things like that?
They don't, but they don't come into schools so much, but they do have open forum meetings about vocal health, and it's useful just to go and link. You can join for free. In fact, it's good to join for free. But they've got all sorts of links. They've got much better links, things also for mental health, and also courses. There's someone else was telling me that also there's some development. She's got a grant through BAPAM for she's a recording artist for actually making first our EP. Yes, sorts of things out there. I know it's not necessarily your thing, but you know, the BAPA, British Association for Performing Arts Medicine. It is about medicine and keep people healthy. But, you know, generally it is a tricky business because you only advocate for yourself and your voice.
Yeah.
Nobody else will. And if people get into shows and performance and voice is a problem, sometimes voice is a problem because the sound is a big problem.
Yeah.
You don't hear yourself well on stage, or you're singing in big groups and you don't hear yourself well. What happens is the Lombard effect kicks in and you start to over push and overdrive to get some feedback. And then that can be a real problem. Do you remember we talked about having one ear plug in when you went into ensemble?
Yeah, or like
just putting a finger, but an earplug's quite good. It gives you a bit of bone conduction, gets you to feel what's going on. You need to be able to monitor. Of course, it's why people wear in-ear monitors when they're performing live for gigs. And there's like show 6, the musical. Don't know if you've seen that. They wear in-ears.
Yeah.
And that means it's really helpful because obviously they're all on handheld mics, so it means they can really monitor themselves. Even then, there's still issues that happen in that show. But you know, vocal injury, vocal issues. You know, that's your instrument. You're using it day in, day out. And if you're doing 8 shows a week, it is the Vocal Olympics. You are an Olympian. You have to be. You have to be able to monitor yourself. You're in training. It's literally keeping yourself fit and well and healthy. Some people just have massively robust larynxes and somehow get through everything without, you know,
issues.
Without all the other bits. Yeah. It's really, really common, but we still feel like we need to promote it.
Yeah.
Or if people had better sound on stage, could hear themselves better, there probably would be a whole lot less injury. I'm not kidding. And it's sort of having good coaches that really help set your voice and your body up for the muscularity of working. It's the same for open air theatre and things like this.
That would be, I think that's
train, but really understanding about that, and it's development. You know, you can't just do these things in a year or two. You know, it's constant learning, isn't it?
Yeah, especially like if it's like an open air thing, if it's cold weather, like there's so many different factors to it. I just I'll include some of if I can find some of the BAPAM like webinars and stuff, I'll include them at the bottom of my.
Yeah, it's good. The links, just even the web links to those sorts of things. Ground. The British Voice Association produced over these lots of vocal health leaflets for things which are also really good. The British Voice Association.org.uk about vocal nodules, vocal fold palsy, emotions and voice. There's loads of leaflets that you could tag. And it's all about just education and vocal health. It's really good. They're really good, you know, links. All right.
It'd be really good. Yeah, I think you've basically, I'm just trying to think if did anybody ask anything? I literally think you've answered everything. Oh, somebody's asked like to avoid strain and pressure in the neck and face. That's obviously from somebody's pushing. If they're this kind of thing that you said earlier.
Yeah. Well, we talk about posture and alignment. People are pushing strain. It tells me that they're over pressurizing through the larynx and the throat, way over pressurizing, and the balance isn't quite correct in their body, in the bigger muscle groups. So I think if we feel tight and we're driving when we're singing, then you know we talk about effort level monitoring. Do you remember we talked about how do you monitor the effort? How do you monitor volume? And separating effort and volume is a funny one for people. And we say, okay, how loud am I being? Okay, but can I be loud? Hey, it's still only 1 out of 10 for me, right? But it's kind of if you're doing hey, you know, and you're driving it, that makes me want to cough. I muddled it really badly. But you know, we can be singing very intensively. You can't hear yourself very well. You can really feel like, oh my God, I'm really over pushed. And it's about understanding that that's overloading. Anything really above a sort of 2 or 3 effort level in the larynx is too high.
Too much,
Will make you feel uncomfortable and sore. So there's something about going and talking to tutors and saying, okay, sometimes we're feeling more effort and strain because our postural alignment isn't great. We haven't got our alignment stable. Sometimes it can be because our postural chain's a bit weak. Weak through your thoracic spine, through your glutes. It might be that you're tight in your hamstrings. It may be that you're dancer trained and you're very used to having everything completely locked in. And remember, we did all that work about letting go of the abdominal, but being a little bit more connected in the back. Sometimes I'm sending people off, professionals off, to go and work with one of our physios that we connect with to do a lot more strengthening work, posterior chain, because you can release your abdominal wall, eat more easily. It's all about too much pressure and not enough airflow.
Yeah, I was actually only yesterday I was singing and I was like trying to look at my face and everything, like to do it in the mirror, and I was like, hold on a second, Molly, you look like you're in pain. Nobody's gonna want to watch that. And I literally just went and like just had to let everything. And then I was like, why am I trying to, like, it just, as you see, we did this and it was like, you don't need to, it can go up and down freely and you can be free and loose and like it can feel like nothing. It's basically like, as you said, like speaking on a pitch, like it's not.
Yes. There's kind of practicing that way and getting in that way is an option. Obviously, I am not, disclaimer that I'm not a singing coach. I would say, how do you think about effort levels? What's happening? And obviously, it is high intensity singing. We talked about not over glottalizing. Often people are just doing glottal onsets when they're doing high intensity singing. How do you conserve your voice when you're singing a lot and working a lot, even in performance speaking voice? Deglottalizing, it's one of the biggest things that we talk about, and between the coaches I work with, the musical theatre coaches and myself, about deglottalizing, and I'd spend a lot of time doing the speech deglottalizing. So we've got easy onsets and that, even though we've got power, and they work with the singing voice aspect, because when you're doing 8 shows a week, you can't bang onto all those vowels in belting. You can't do it. You can do it as once or twice in a lesson, but you can't do it 8 shows a week. You can't do it 3 or 4 function gigs where you're doing 3 45-minute sets. You can't do that either, because there's a tax. So much to learn about.
So much. This is why I'm trying to get people interested. And because obviously when I came into it, I knew nothing. I obviously had always been interested in singing and stuff, but even just down to speaking, and I notice it because I always say to my family now, like, if it gets to a stage in the evening, everyone's like blah 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 blah, and I'm like, God, I remember I was asked, did I, they at the start of the year, people be like, oh, are you from like a loud family and stuff, and I was like, oh God, I don't really know. If you have to question it, you do. Like, the fact that I have to go, oh, do I? If I come from a quiet family, straight away. But I was like, oh, maybe. And like literally coming back, everyone's like, blah, blah, blah. It's like, who can get the joke first?
And it was remember, it was really quite difficult for you to moderate your volume. You come and say, I find it quite difficult to moderate volume. I'm either got to be quiet or, I'm really aware of how that is. And, and it's sort of, it's also just culturally as well. There'll be cultural sex. Sometimes it's also to do with how many siblings that you might have. And just as much as I might work with people, perhaps less so performers, but I certainly work with other people in business and things like this who really struggle in noisy places and to do network meetings and presentations. And often they've come from, not always, but they've often come from very quiet, controlled households. And so they felt very uncomfortable using a loud voice. So it's just fascinating. It's like, what's the norm for us? What's the resting state? And I think for lots of people like yourself, very much we start in that place of how do we downscale everything gradually, because it's become like everything's out of calibration. You're just working harder, you're louder, everything to cope with the hoarseness. And all it does is just compounds it. And we softer, we get you to reduce vocal load, we take all the high intensity stuff out, we manage the allergy, we do the letting go, we just try and get everything, like strip it back, don't we? And then, okay, now let's start with some very gentle, easy voice. It's quite hard for you to not have an attack.
It was.
That calls it energetic voicing.
I didn't know how like hopefully I'm not obnoxiously loud, but like I think it's just that it was the effort level and like all that kind of thing. And then I remember when I went to see Declan, was it June or something? He was like, you're sounding a lot better and you're not as harsh and stuff. And I was like, well, that's all down to Tori. She is telling me.
No, it's down to you. But it's experiencing that and feeling that it's successful. The thing is that you start to downgrade it at the beginning and the voice is worse. It's quite breathy. Do you remember it was breathy? It was quite husky, and you're like, oh, I'm not liking that. And so we have to take it down, and you have about 4 weeks taking it right down, and then it starts to get a bit easier to do the softer voice, and then it goes down a bit more, and then it gets a bit easier. So keep working on it. Keep working on it. Just easy voice and everything, because you want the loud stuff. You want you need to you still use that, but you need to use it selectively on stage, really, and that's it. So I think we've covered everything.
I think that's brilliant. I can't wait to show people this now.
Okay.
Yeah, I will. Also, I think I will try. Yeah, obviously leave the BAPAN links and stuff. And I've told literally everyone about you. I was like, God, I feel like Tori lady is famous. I was like, honest to God, she's like a wizard. But the whole process of me like recovering and everything like ended up being so emotional, because like obviously I was crying so much because I had no voice, and all of a sudden I was able to sing again, and it was just amazing. Then you realize how much you need to appreciate your voice and what you have, and this is your tool and you need to use it. And yeah, absolutely down to you and Declan. It was a whole journey.
Plan, and I think it's while we're doing lots of ego. Part of it is actually trusting the people that you're working with, and actually trusting the process. So quite a lot of people will not do as well as you because they're not really complying, or they're unable to comply. And then there are different roads that we travel down. Sometimes what happens is things don't resolve as well as yours did, and it did take a while, didn't it? I mean, we're talking about 4 or 5 months.
Yeah, it was months. Yeah.
And certainly I always say it's about 4 months, and certainly by the time you get to about 4 or 5 sessions, you should be starting to see some changes. And I think that's about the turning point. If we started to do like 2 or 3 months and things are just not really changing at all, usually before that, I ask people to get back in to see an ENT, because sometimes the diagnosis hasn't been quite so accurate. And what we see sometimes is that the swelling has started to go down a bit, but one side starts to look a bit more than the other. And then we go, okay, we think there might actually be a cyst, or there might be something else going on. So, there's always a process of what do we expect? And that's just working with anybody like me, really, who's sort of some experience. You can't, you've got to have the bums on seats, as I say. You've got to have enough experience to know the path, and I'm very fortunate that I get to work with lots of really experienced professionals. So I've got a good network, really, and just there are these little networks all over the UK that can be tapped into. That's good. I love it that you're self-advocating, but you're also advocating for others. I just think it's brilliant. It's really important.
Yeah, I think it is. Great. Well, I think we've got everything there. I will.
Yeah.
I'll just do that. Thank you very much.